Hello viewers, Tim Paul here with the Huddle and with Paul Sculpher, regular contributor, been on the Huddle before. Paul, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks very much for having me once more.
I think of all the times we've sat down to talk, this is probably the busiest in the UK market specifically, and that's what we're going to focus on today. On the online sphere, a lot happening, but on the land-based, maybe we can start off by discussing. There's been a bit of a sea change, certainly with John O'Reilly's departure, or kind of, I guess it's a retirement at Rank Group.
Absolutely. I mean, Rank you would class as the kind of grand old lady of UK casinos in terms of consistent ownership for however many years it's been, however many decades it's been, and John O'Reilly's been in charge for a good while. Mm-hmm. I used to work for them, my wife used to work for them. Most people, or many people in the offline industry have passed through there, and him leaving to an extent the end of an era. And I think there's always benefits from changing of an old guard, especially someone who's been in charge for as long as that through a ton of different changes. I'm sure they'll appoint the new CEO reasonably soon, but I think there are some elements that Rank, they had their preferences. John O'Reilly had his preferences as to how he wanted the business to run, mm-hmm. and some of that I'm sure we'll see some fairly high-profile changes fairly quickly. Loyalty scheme on the slots would be one, which is a standard for most operators in the world, and Rank have resisted that, or they withdrew it, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that come back fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. I know I mentioned that we're going to talk specifically on kind of land-based within this segment of the interview, but do you think a potential successor might be tasked with digitalizing the business ever more and preparing it for, I guess, I don't even want to say new era, more or less the current era of more towards online?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I think it would be fair to say back in the day when online first appeared as an option, they fumbled it fairly badly, branding it as rank.com when no one really knew what Rank was. Then they went through the Blue Square acquisition, and now they've got a business that lines up with their peers. Having said that, they got into it really quite late. I'm sure we'll talk about the taxation changes later. It's difficult to see how they can catch up any further. The big brands have dominated the market for a while. And it's an interesting argument. Just because you've got a huge database of offline players doesn't automatically mean a thriving online business. I mean, their database was so big from decades of operation, and sticking with the membership door policy in the offline casinos gave them the database to work from. But I'm sure it'll be a tough task to make the digital business dramatically better. They've been thrashing that database for a long time. But again, an overall change of approach, perhaps a better chance to integrate the two halves of the business, and a new broom. It'll make a difference. We'll just see which direction it goes. Yeah,
it might be somewhat of a paradox at the moment because, as you mentioned, we will go into kind of the autumn budget and the changes. But land-based, certainly on the surface, whether it's affected by the budget overall is a different story. But on the surface, no real increases, no real changes. It sort of came out, you could argue, unscathed. And there's obviously the impacts of the Gambling Act, where you can have more slots now. And in fact, just on the screen now, this is perfect timing. We've got the Paddy Power Sportsbook at the Hippodrome, which is something else that's come in. It sounds like a weird question, but is it actually quite a good time for the land-based sector in many ways?
Absolutely, yeah. The increased slots it's an interesting dynamic. I think for the smaller casinos, the less busy casinos, more slots don't necessarily make a huge difference. They're not free. You have to pay to rent them or buy them. But once you get into your Empires, your Hippodromes, and even the bigger provincial sites, it's just an instant increment to income. You go there on a Thursday night, 12 out of 20 slots have been being played. If you add in another 20 slots, you'll get another 10 players. And from that perspective, there's going to be some additional GGR to play with. And that'll put some life into these businesses. And Rank have a bunch of their provincial sites are very busy on the slot side. So I'm just thinking, for example, Manchester Bury New Road is a lively site, and adding more slots in there will just be incremental income. Perhaps it'll make the new CEO look good before they've even put any work in.
Yeah. And we've got the Win acquisition in Mayfair as well, which was, if anything, it was just quite an interesting and high profile brand name, sort of not coming to London necessarily for the first time, but yeah.
It makes perfect sense with the Al Marjan project in Q2 next year to have a kind of link site in between the States and that site, and basically get a ring around the world so that any decent spending customer, you can give them an option pretty much wherever they are in the world. It makes perfect sense, and it's a spectacular site. We were in there last week actually, just having a look around, and it's a beautiful site. So it's back from the day when we used to talk about the big 6 casinos in London and only 2 of them are still open. It's good to see them, what looks like, thriving.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go on to the overall impact of the autumn budget, because we've been quite positive so far, talked about the benefits of land-based, but of course it wasn't positive for the industry. There was a quote at a panel yesterday from Charles Cohen, Department of Trust, and forgive me if I get the words, if I paraphrase ever so slightly, but he said it wasn't just a failure from the lobbyists, it was a failure throughout the industry, because it was as the BGC said at the time, a hammer blow. Remote gaming duty is up to 40% from April. Sports betting kind of betting duty is up online but up to 25% from next April. What were your kind of initial thoughts, when we received this news?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the lobbying side of it. That's not really my area. But the impact, I mean, every sector, every part of society will complain when taxes go up. That's natural, and that's part of the lobbying process long term. And in some cases that feels justified, and in some cases it doesn't. In this case, it's so simple for people to switch operators from a regulated UK operator paying their duty to something that's grey, black market, whatever, whether you need a VPN to get there or whether it's just a link that you might spot when you're browsing the internet. And it does really feel to me like the overall tax take from this element, I mean, it's kind of standard Laffer curve stuff, but long term, it feels to me that the play will just migrate and that we're net loser in every way. There's less tax, the players are not as well protected, you're essentially encouraging unregulated operators to thrive and putting people in a position where they've got no player protection. My background's offline. I've worked as a shift manager. I've had the interactions with customers when they've found themselves gambling too much. It's not a fun thing to do, but it is part of your responsibility if you're making a living from it. And I appreciate some grey market operators fulfill take care of their players as if they were regulated. Some don't. So you kind of, what are we doing here? To raise the rate, make less money, put more people in harm's way. That just doesn't seem very sensible to me.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's easy to everyone might complain hypothetically when taxes go up. It's easier for us to sit here and say they shouldn't raise taxes. But when we spoke on a huddle with Kirsty Caldwell, I believe it was, when there were reports, I think it was 2023 or 2024, that taxes might go up, and they didn't at that time. And I think the conclusion, or certainly my opinion, is that the betting industry could afford a few more percentage in taxes, because profits they're not too bad. But to go up to 40 from 21, what was the basis? The figures they suggested were they generate 3 billion. Then it went, or 2 or 3 billion. It almost halved in the final budget. Right. And then, as you say, the reality is, and we've seen in the Netherlands and countries like that, the reality is the tax take will go down, or we're predicting it will go down. So then, as you say, who wins from that?
And it does feel like whether it's a political thing or whether it's a playing to the galleries thing. Yeah, it's the proportion of the population who gamble online isn't huge, and the people who don't, generally speaking, it makes a good headline. We're punishing the companies who make their money from a sin, the standard kind of sin tax conversation. If it's just to get votes, or it's just to make the government look good, that's a little bit depressing in itself. I mean, we can't. It's difficult for us to take a step outside the industry and really get a feel for that. But given that it seems very clear that it's not going to have the desired effect in terms of tax take, it's going to damage the players, then why would you do it? If the only thing is to look more popular, then it's a pretty limp reason.
Yeah. As you say, that is a key issue that we've faced, I think, especially in the UK, with regards to the overall perception of gambling, and actually the perception of online gambling more. I think the land-based generally is seen as, if you want to go to a casino and have a good time, whereas playing online, you can do it anywhere. So that, there's a perception issue. But this is a question the Betting Gaming Council CEO Gronja Hurst, she's going to be here at the Huddle this week. This is probably more of a question for her. But as an industry, is there any way we can combat that the problem of it's an easy vote winner, and whether it makes sense or not, gambling will be one of the first. And if you think of it as syntax, one of the first to kind of suffer. Is there anything we can do?
And the one thing, if it goes the way we'll expect it to go, and the way it went in the Netherlands, if the overall tax take does fall, then that's a pretty easy thing to point to. I appreciate that's going to take a while to filter through, and nobody wants to be waiting 5 years to say, we told you were wrong, because by then players ain't going to come back. If they reduce the tax rates, and the operators in the UK can offer better bonuses, it's going to be very difficult to get people back. It's once the cat's out of the bag, it's gone. So I'm delighted to be able to leave that on to Gronja.
A final sort of topic, final question from me. Everything we've discussed, and I think we've been quite balanced. We've talked about some potential positives and some very serious, not negatives, but the situation we're in. Yeah, challenges. Yeah, 2026. For the UK, in terms of, I guess, adjusting to these new rates, but also the kind of maybe the changes in leadership in land-based. What do you foresee? Do you see any trends, anything making headlines that you might even be writing about in Global Gaming Insider magazine?
Well, I mean, if we zoom out to the global market,
Mm-hmm.
obviously the prediction market side of things in the States is quite fascinating. Obviously, I'll put something together on that as discussed, on the basis that it's the great big new thing which we've already seen and been through. From a purely UK perspective, I mean, clearly we're going to see some companies fold. We're going to see players leave. We're going to see the people employed in the UK industry on the online side. It's going to damage that as well.
Mm-hmm.
From the land-based side of it, as you said, we've seen a lot of casino closures over the last 5 years. No real damage from this budget. Extra slots should liven it up. You'd like to think that's a bit of a lifeline. As I would argue, as an offline guy, that the kind of ratio of jobs to GGR in offline is much higher. Therefore, if you give offline a bit more protection, then you're going to safeguard more jobs. I work in recruitment, so the nature of that is always important to me. But the thousands of people who work in the offline casino industry should feel a little safer now than they would have done just before the budget. Mm-hmm. And the tens of thousands that work in the online industry probably less so, which is a little concerning. So it's overall, obviously the outlook's mixed, pretty clearly split between offline and online. Yeah. We'll just have to see what happens next, I guess. It's a dynamic time.
Dynamic is the word. There's plenty for us. Not that we're benefiting from anyone, any challenges, but there's plenty for us to write about, and there's plenty to discuss. I'm glad you mentioned prediction markets, but as an issue, we won't go into that quite yet because that's a whole huddle in itself, which I'm sure at some point we'll probably have. But Paul, thanks as always for joining us. Thanks for contributing to the magazine as well, and I'm sure we'll hear again from you soon.
Thanks very much.